thank you. For those of you who know me, it's going to come as no surprise that I am going to break the 3 cardinal rules of Ed Talk. Number 1, I'm going to stand behind the podium. Number 2, I have a prop. And number 3, I have notes. So it should come as no surprise to those of you who know me that I tend to be a rule breaker. But really, what I want to say today, I believe is really important for all of us, especially in this current climate legislatively. A couple times a week, our email boxes ping, and we have notices from MESA, M-A-S-A, let me set this down, from MASB and also from our county that provides us with legislative updates, kind of the status of what the legislature is up to and so forth. And so usually in those legislative updates, there's a call to action, something that will say, please contact your legislator and let them know your opinion, whether you oppose or support whatever the legislation happens to be. So I tend to be a really good soldier, so I do that. I will contact my legislator, usually by phone, and say, this is what the bill is, and this is my opinion, and that this is the impact I believe this is going to have on not only the kids in Lake Orion, but kids all across our state. And so they usually say, well, thanks a lot, Marion. We really value your input. And then when I look at how they voted, it's usually the opposite of what I said. So then I decided I'm going to take a different approach, and I was going to write letters because I could be a little bit more expansive and comprehensive and provide data and research as to why I support and or oppose any legislation. So I would do that, and I have to say, I do get responses. In fact, my legislator, John Riley in Lake Orion, he always writes back in a very timely fashion. And the other thing he does that I appreciate is he usually gives his opinion, his stance on what he's going to do. And again, it's usually the opposite of what I had asked. So it dawned on me clearly, our voice is not going to be the one that's going to be heard. And, it's really, for me, it's a dilemma. I've been in this profession for well over 50 years, believe it or not. And if I look around the room, there are probably about 300 superintendents in this room with, let's just say, an average of 5 years of experience. So 5 times 300 is 15,000 years of expertise just among those of us here in this room. And yet our voices are not being heard by the legislators. Just to give you an example, I'm thinking about the 3rd grade reading legislation. Yes, I want kids to be able to read at 3rd grade, but is retention a viable solution for that? And so no matter how many people went and testified, no matter how many letters we wrote, no matter how many phone calls we made, our voices were not heard, and retention remained in that legislation, much to my disappointment, and I'm sure many of you as well. So I decided that I had to try a different approach, that because I recognized that educators' voices are not necessarily being heard, I figured that we had to bring together other people that our legislators would listen to. And that's how our Legislative Advocacy Committee became a realization for me. And so my prop, this is the committee. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got this started and who's in it. If you look at the circles, and I think it's also on the slide up there as well, but you'll see that it's comprised of a number of different groups. Parents are in the group, certainly, and they really make a difference with our legislators because they share their emotions, they share their stories, they share their experiences with their children, and they really are kind of the grassroots of advocating for their children. The senior citizens, this is really, especially in my community in Lake Orion and in the northern part of Oakland County, kind of an untapped group that we don't use as often as we want. And then when we want them, it's usually because we have a millage or a bond issue and we go to them. So I felt it was really important to tap into their expertise and their experiences. Many of them have grandchildren in our community. Community members, these are people who are not parents in the community, and they certainly do have an impact on what they have to say, even though their major issue is about taxation and being taxed. If I could bring them together to help us advocate for our schools. And then also the businesses. It's pretty clear that all of our businesses expect our students to be ready for them and ready for work to go into their businesses. So I felt that it was really important to bring them together. And if you look at the center of the diagram, it's the Lake Orion Community Schools, which is the schools. We are at the ground floor, and if we are really kind of the hub of this whole process. So while we are not necessarily in the outer rings where the legislature are, we are going to drive this wheel in our Legislative Advocacy Committee. So let me just tell you how it works. What I did was I sent out a survey, and the survey I asked a number of questions. First I explained, and it went to probably about 8,000 people in Lake Orion area, and I first explained what advocacy meant, and then I asked, some demographic information, but I asked them things like, what do you consider to be the most pressing issues facing education today? And I gave them a number of choices. The top 3 things that they responded to, which was not surprising, especially the first one, was adequate funding for education overall. They felt that was a huge issue for us. The second one was legislation that reflects a lack of knowledge about educational issues, which I was really pleased to hear that. And then the third one was the inability to provide input to legislative decisions. So those were the top 3 pressing issues that those who responded replied to. So then I indicated, I wanted to make it clear that I'm not talking about having a ton of meetings. People do not like going to meetings, and they're all very busy people, especially the group that I wanted to convene. And so I said, as an advocate, here are some options of things that you might be able to do. And I had things on there like write letters, call your legislators, convene some meetings, go to Lansing and testify at various hearings, and so forth. I was overwhelmed by the response. I had over 200 people identify that they wanted to participate. So as a first round, I was thrilled to death. But I did have one meeting, an initial face-to-face meeting where I brought everybody together. And I just wanted to kind of talk about, this is our mission, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is why it is so critical for our students, for all of us together, to be advocating. Because as I said before, and I continue to say, our legislators do not necessarily listen to us. And despite all of our experience, all of our expertise, and all of the years that we have worked in our profession, we are not being listened to, even though I believe that we do know what's best for kids. So here's the process. I will get legislation from, information from Peter at Mesa or whomever, and I look through it and I kind of identify some key topics and what are the key points, and I target the message and I get it out to my committee. And I do that. I have certainly email is one of the things I use, but I also have a Twitter account, and our website is loaded with legislative information. So I get that out, and I do make it really clear that their voice should be heard regardless whether they support or oppose something. And I never tell them what my position is. I don't want to tell people how to vote, but I do want them to know what the issues are. So in closing, obviously our committee is still in its infancy, but I have to tell you, hearing from over 200 community members, parents, and there are educators on my committee is really extremely encouraging that we have that kind of a draw in Lake Orion. And what I would like to challenge all of you is to really think about doing something very similar, because we have to build that critical mass of people who are going to advocate for our children. And especially now that the finance study has been completed, this is a critical time. So if you are interested in knowing more about it, would like our materials, our survey, I would be happy to share that with you. Thank you for being such a good audience and listening. Thank you.